serve on our judiciary, if confirmed. I'm going to dive right in. I've got a number of questions. We'll start with you, Ms. Kumi Jackson. It's been widely reported that President Biden met with you in anticipation of your nomination to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit, and congratulations again on that nomination. During that meeting with him, were you asked for commitments regarding, or did you discuss abortion or Roe versus Wade, Second Amendment, or D.C. versus Heller, efforts to defund the police, illegal immigration, any of those issues?
None of the above, Senator.
Okay. Judge Jackson, what about you?
No, sir.
Okay. Judge Jackson, in your notes for a presentation that you gave at Columbia Law School in 2019, I believe, you said that, quote, disparities in judicial outcomes can also occur when judges consider legitimate and relevant factors, close quote. Talk to me a little bit about what that meant.
Thank you, Senator. That presentation was a symposium that I'd been invited to comment on an article that was being presented. And the article itself was about judicial bias. And I was critiquing it and making arguments in response to it based on my experience. And I believe that I would have to see exactly the context of the quote that you read, but what I was suggesting was the idea that because the factors in the law concerning something like sentencing are open-ended, that Congress says you have to sentence defendants to terms of imprisonment that are sufficient but not greater than necessary to promote the purposes of punishment. And it lists the purposes of punishment, and any judge who looks at that has basically those broad parameters within which to think about how they're going to sentence. But the judge then will have to decide whether they're thinking about deterrence or retribution or various purposes in order to determine how they're going to sentence. And my idea was that a similarly situated judge looking at the exact same set of facts, applying those factors in 3553A, could reach a different result. So that you're going to have sort of inherent in the nature of judicial exercise of discretion in the world of something like sentencing, disparity, unbeknownst.
No, that's helpful.
Yes.
Now, I believe you've been a judge now for about 8 years, if I'm not mistaken. In your experience as a judge, and prior to that, your experience as a lawyer, would you agree or disagree with someone who said that most racial disparities in criminal convictions and sentencings result from an unconscious racial bias of judges, juries, and other judicial decision makers? Would you agree or disagree with that statement?
Well, Senator, let me just say that as a judge now, it's very important for me not to make personal commitments about things like the question that you asked, that my personal views about anything don't impact my rulings. I am aware of social science research. There is a professor at Harvard, Professor Banerjee, who has done implicit bias work. And there are studies from the commission when I was back at the commission in the policymaking role that talked about and indicated that all of us, human beings, can have biases that we are unconsciously operating on, and that we have to think about that when we are making decisions, and especially policymakers in the criminal justice system. Now, I'm aware of those studies, but I'm not a social scientist, so...
No, I understand that, and I'm just asking for your overall sense as a judge, and certainly not for a commitment or social science. In 2019, I think in connection with notes prepared in connection with the same speech, you noted that quote, observed inconsistencies are largely attributable to factors other than group-based bias by judicial decision makers. Does that ring a bell? Is that something
Yes,
you
in the
stand by?
context of the critique that I was making, because the article had indicated that they saw, they showed research that there were these demographic disparities, and the article said that they were attributable to bias.
Right.
And so I was trying to give another perspective.
Right. So what are some of the leading factors, that is, other than unconscious bias, that you see having an impact there, that account for some of the disparities that we see in convictions and in sentencing?
Well, one of the things that I was aware of in my time on the Sentencing Commission, and is something that you all have worked on, were the differences in statutory penalties for things like crack and powder, that many
Vast disparities between what you get sentenced for with crack versus
correct,
powder cocaine.
and that it was having a demographic effect, because the research and statistics showed that an overwhelming number of defendants who were convicted of crimes involving crack were African American.
Thank you, and that is very helpful. I do want to make sure I get to one other thing I wanted to talk to you about before I run out of time. You've remarked that presidents are not kings. That's a comment that I've made a number of times as well, and tend to agree with it. Whenever you're sitting in any court, from time to time you have to review executive actions. It seems like executive actions have more of a likelihood of coming up in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit than many other places. You think it would be appropriate, under the guise of prosecutorial discretion, for any president of the United States to tell an agency not to enforce a particular law?
Senator, I'm unfortunately not going to be able to engage in a hypothetical discussion, precisely because those kinds of matters might come before me, and I don't want to prejudge any case that might involve those facts.
Okay.
I do understand the implications of the law related to it, but I can't tell you whether it would be appropriate or not.
Okay. I'd love to delve more into this. I see my time's expired. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Lee. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Grassley, and